and welcome Carmen. Our next guest is Carmen Parahi, who is going to talk about diversity in the media, particularly why it matters so much and how magazine publishers can achieve it in their own titles. Carmen will be well known to many of you already as an outstanding journalist. She's worked on TVNZ, TV3 and Maori TV and has won numerous awards, including this year, the Editorial Executive of the Year and Runner-Up Reporter of the Year at the Voyager Awards. For the past year, though, Carmen's worked at Stuff, where she's focused on diversity and te ao Māori. She's helped lead Stuff's historic apology and the subsequent rollout of stories that have shone a bright light on historic, often hidden, examples of racism in Aotearoa's past. I think, Carmen, you're planning to talk for about 10 or 15 minutes and then we'll be open for questions. So if everybody could feel free to contribute those on the Q&A button as we go. Over to you, Carmen.
Kia ora koutou, kei aku nui, kei aku rahi. Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui ki a koe, Sally. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to everyone today. So wonderful to see and hear some of the kōrero today. I've actually just come back from doing a kōrero at Waitangi, the home of the place where the Treaty of Waitangi was signed between Māori and the Crown on behalf of all settlers coming to New Zealand. So it was very nice to be there because we talked to the New Zealand History Teachers Association, and they're going through their own reckoning and understanding of what it means to represent all New Zealanders and the way they teach history to all of our kids in our schools throughout the country. And so that's, I wanted to just mention that because just as Stuff last year, actually it was this time last year that a group of us journalists from within Stuff, young and old, and I like to put myself in the middle age bracket, but the fact is I'm more down the old people's end. But we had young journalists and older journalists, more experienced journalists in this group that came together because we'd had enough about where we were as a media organisation and also what had been going on with the media and representation of all New Zealanders, particularly Māori being the Indigenous and First Peoples of this country, how we'd represented Māori and Māori voices and stories throughout the years. And so part of that reckoning was because we'd seen what was going on overseas. There was a lot of public conversations globally, nationally, locally about racism. And myself being a journalist, I'd done a lot of work on institutional racism and the impacts on Māori. Terrible, terrible impacts, terrible health outcomes for Māori. There are disproportionate issues for Māori. Anyway, part of that was, and so we talked to Sinead Boucher, who you would have heard earlier today, very inspiring woman, decided to buy this company for a mere $1. But thankfully she did because we all managed to keep our jobs and Stuff is thriving. Brilliant. And part of that, not only was she brave to do that, she was also brave enough to hear the journalists' concerns about who we were and what we represented. And so when we talked to her and said, Sinead, we've got an idea. How about we start to better represent all New Zealanders and better represent our Māori? She was open to it. I'm sure if you heard her today, you thought, what a very innovative woman that Sinead Boucher is. And she said yes. So we pitched and talked about everything, and we created Tiaki. Tiaki is a guard post. It's a Māori carving. It's usually a post that you put in an environment to protect the environment. So metaphysically and physically, it's there to represent protection for that environment. Usually when something bad's happened there, it's to let people know what's been going on, or if there's if kai, because kai is a big part of who we are, food, so food gathering places. So it's there to protect the place, but also to warn people that come in there to mind your behaviour. check your behaviour when you come into this environment. And so Tiaki is our strategy for better representation of Te Ao Māori, the Māori world, and diversity, all minority communities in New Zealand. That's what we were asking for, and that's what we've been doing for the past 12 months. Part of that work was creating Tiaki, the section on stuff, which is where we showcase diversity. We push it everywhere across the whole company, but it's just in this one part of our website where we also push for diverse stories from diverse communities, minority communities that haven't been fairly and well represented in the past. And part of the work that we were doing was, what have we been doing? So the question was asked by Mark Stevens, is it time for us to reckon with our past, to investigate ourselves? My initial reaction was, ooh, do we really want to go there? Because we might find things we don't like very much. But he said yes, and it was endorsed, and we decided to do it. And so a huge team, every newspaper that we own, we have 9 large newsrooms across the country, 30-odd community papers, as well as stuff online. Were all investigated. We had reporters who went back and scoured through papers past, looked through all our own archives, actually physically went to libraries, which is old school journalism and what we should always be doing, and found that and investigated ourselves. And what we found was not surprising to some. In the early days particularly was there was a lot of racism against Māori. A lot of what we discovered was that the papers that were set up by Western European settlers. They were set up to support the interests of Western European settlers and the mechanics of colonisation as it played out. From 160 years ago was our first paper. 160 years of what we investigated. And we found racism, discrimination, we'd marginalised Māori voices, we'd also helped create stereotypes against Māori. And for everything that we saw, we talked about it amongst our team, and it was very difficult for them to reckon with what they were reading. And some actually didn't know or understand the bias or the discrimination that was on display. So it was interesting that we also, at the same time investigating our company, we were also educating our journalists about how to see bias, because sometimes we just don't see it. We don't know what we know. Well, we don't know, right? And so that was a big part of it, was helping to change the lens for our journalists. So instead of this single lens, monocultural lens we call it, whereas a very Western European perspective on news and events, we asked them to switch it, to create a multi-lens view of what we were seeing. And what we saw was we didn't have many, in the early days, definitely didn't have many female voices. Didn't have many. There were diverse communities at the beginning that came with Western Europe here. It wasn't just people from Western Europe, but different parts of Eastern Europe people were here too. So, and they were discriminated against. There are people from the Chinese communities. They came here early. The Indian communities from India was being set up as well. Pacifica people were coming as well. So all those communities were just shut out of the conversation, weren't even covered by news. And so these are all the things we discovered about ourselves. Mark Stevens, our editorial director, decided it's bad. So we will publish everything that we discovered, and we put it all out there, warts and all. It wasn't very nice reading. And Mark apologised on behalf of staff for what we'd done, and with a commitment to do better. In our company charter, we've now got I'm pretty sure Sinead probably talked about this, in our company charter that was published the same day, We have the Treaty of Waitangi as part of our commitment to Māori, as well as how to be more culturally appropriate and to better represent all minority communities. So we really made that commitment. And so part of our work since then is how do we, because you can talk a good talk, right? Everyone's like, yeah, we can do it. We can better represent all communities. But if you don't put some actions behind it, it's just easy speak. And so now the hard work is to put actions behind, embed all this change, this multi-lens journalism into our system, into our business, so that it's always there. At the same time, supporting the rest of the media industry to help to do that too. More use of Te Reo Māori, for instance. But we also encourage our journalists, if you speak Mandarin, please write a story in Mandarin and English. Why are we limiting ourselves with just using English? Funnily enough, funny story, just a quick note, English is not an official language of New Zealand. There are two official languages, one is sign language, one is Te Reo Māori. But because English was has always been there and has part of the education system, we've just always used English. So since then, a lot of stuff has happened. We've got bilingual titles. Part of this conversation isn't limited to just our newspapers, it's just the journalism. So I don't know if you can see, New Zealand House and Garden have now got about to launch their magazine, and it has a bilingual title now, Toitu Kainga, Toitu Mara, beautiful. So it's not a direct translation. What it is, it was the Toitu Kainga, Toitu Mara is about the people themselves and the love that they have for their gardens and their homes and sharing them with their readers. And also part of what our magazines are doing now, and it's what we're doing, is we've opened up every community in New Zealand. There are so many different types of wonderful cultural communities in our country. I'm not talking ethnic communities, just ethnic. I'm talking about cultural communities, right? Our rainbow communities, our disabilities communities, Māori, all ranges of Pacific communities, Asian, so many different Asian communities here. They all have stories. They all have experiences that we can help to give voice to publish these wonderful stories. It gives us a greater depth and breadth of storytelling, and that's what this is all about. And of course, commercially, the more people you include in your magazines or your publishing, the more likely you will increase the more people and the different communities that you can also have commercial opportunities with. And this is part of it. It's not the reason why we did what we did, but it also is a part of it. It's opened up conversations. We had closed doors with Māori tribal authorities who didn't want a bar of us. We've now been putting our shoes on, walking into their offices and having cups of tea to have proper conversations, which we never used to have before. No one wants us to stop doing journalism, but they just want us to do better. As journalists and publishers and people who, whatever you do, whether it's in newspapers or magazines, we just want to tell a great story, offer a great product, connect with our communities. The best way to do it is make yourself available to all communities and all people.
Thanks,
That's pretty
Carmen.
much all I have to say.
Yeah. We've got some good questions here. So we've got one person asking, what's your advice on moving from conversation to actual actions? How do you bring people along to ensure that diversity actually becomes part of the organisational DNA?
Yeah, so many things that you can do. Like there's so many little actions, but it has to suit your organisation as well and the people that you have there, because not everyone's ready. We were ready to have that conversation. We had the right leaders in place to be able to say, we need to do this. So one of the actions that we've done was to create the section where we just showcase all our different languages, communities, whatever. We also We're doing huge changes to our recruitment. Going back to the good old days, when we used to have cadetships, interns, that stuff. Oh, yeah. So actually, I tell you, a lot of this is just about common sense stuff, like being with your community. And some of the research that we uncovered were that we had like non-Māori journalists in the 50s who would go to Māori hui who could actually understand the language. And so the early journalists, there were early journalists who could understand the language and that were part of the community. And so they had really good access. So it is about finding powerful access. So you need to work in partnerships, collaborations. You need to start talking to different organizations that fit with who you are about how to bring in these different voices. Because, like I said, Māori, and they're still not there yet, didn't trust us, didn't like the way we've been telling their stories. We can blame them because some of the stuff that we've done was shocking. But I can honestly say we're not alone in that. We know that all media organisations across the board have also not uplifted the voices of all people the same as they have for Pākehā New Zealand. It's a hard thing to hear. So other actions include we've created a list, a checklist, an internal checklist, so that you now are being asked, why did you put that person ahead of the other person? Why using that headline instead of a different headline? Why? What are the gender pronouns? Have you got that correct? What have you used their titles correctly? Have you? Are you going to include their iwi? Would they like people to know their iwi tribal affiliations? Just ask them, of course. So part of it. What's so funny is that we wrote the checklist and then we realized, that's just basic journalism, right? It's just basic, get the names correct, get all these things. But we're adding, but what it also does is that when you're talking to people, you're like, so what iwi are you from? Oh, okay, yeah, and we spell that correctly, we make sure we use the macrons, but it also means it gives you another layer of connection as well when you get people's names when you're thinking about them as a person. These are in our news stories as well, not just the features where they get a little bit more time. So that checklist is really important because what we noticed, like for example, we'd done a story. It was focused on Māori. There were no Māori in the story. No one had actually gone to talk to the people that were in the story. In the first instance, bad journalism. The second instance, why would you talk about a group and not actually go and talk to that group? And in one instance, they were actually there at the event. It's bizarre. But what it also showed that there was bias there because they just talked to their own like to like, so people to people. And the other one there's another one, it's a Māori one, where we put all the professors, we put the Pākehā men first, gave them their titles, but the Māori that were involved, who are actually professors, whereas the Pākehā men were associate professors, we didn't say Professor so-and-so for the female Māori woman, but we gave the Pākehā men their title. And in the hierarchy of academics, the Māori people's title was actually higher. So that was interesting too. So these are things that people don't realise, because people that wrote the story, and when I talked to the editorial team around that story, they didn't actually see what the problem was. And so it's actually lifting our eye, taking away the paru in our eyes or changing the lens so it's multi-lensing what we're doing. What other actions have we done? Recruitment, huge drive to talk to our different communities, to try and find ways to get different people from different ethnic groups, from disabilities community. We want to talk to people. When we talk diversity, it's not just about ethnicity. It is actually people like who are in their 50s, not my age group, people in their 50s who might like a career change, right? And might want to change their career midway, got some good writing skills, ask a lot of questions, and it has life experience to make a really good writer for you. So it's there as well. It's also our young people. Everyone knows to be a good journalist or to be a good writer or a storyteller, you just need to do the time. So if you can bring young people in who really can't afford to go to universities, do 3 years at university, but you can find a different way to get them through your newsroom and to become journalists, why wouldn't you create something wonderful like that? So these are all the things we're trying to do, right? Because sometimes economics can get in the way of getting fabulous writers into our newsrooms or into our publishing houses.
I'm just aware we haven't got all that much long to go, but I'm just aware that a lot of the people who are listening are magazine publishers with tiny editorial teams, which kind of makes it really difficult to get a truly diverse set of outlooks. And then if you're having an editorial discussion or you're brainstorming or anything like that. So have you got any suggestions on how you get around that?
I think a checklist might actually be a good idea if you do have a checklist on, okay, and also one thing that so two things, checklist, so that you see, have I included a female voice? Who are all the people in these? If we're talking about food, are we just talking to a particular demographic? Do we actually need to talk about food? I mean, New Zealanders love all types of food these days, right? So are we talking to Indian community about their fabulous food experiences, all the wonderful food that comes from our Indian whānau and whānau from India and all the different Pacifica communities? Though you can create your own checklist. You can create your own, so you multi-lens, you put and take off your lens that you've been using for the last 100 and odd 200 years and put on this multi-lens. You start asking yourselves, have I done this? Do I do that? Go back through one of your magazines and see who are the voices you've used. Is it diverse enough? Are the subjects in here diverse enough? Are my bloody photos diverse enough? Are the products diverse enough? It's not really that hard. I don't think it's that hard, but unless people have the will and understanding to do it and to actually make it a habit, normalized, it can be very difficult. You can just fall back to your old patterns. So that's why you've got to keep agitating yourself, put it front of mind so that you keep doing it and keep asking yourself these questions. Create your own checklist. Like seriously, pick out the magazine, look at it and think to yourselves, is it diverse enough?
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Carmen. That was really, really good mind-stretching stuff.
Well, I'd just like to say I love magazines. I always wanted to be out there. But you know, when you just dreamed as a kid, you're like, oh, I could be a magazine editor one day and be those fabulous. I mean, we all watch those movies with those fabulous magazine editors. Yeah, I had that dream.
Yeah, it's just like that.
Yeah, totally just like that. Yeah. Love it.
Okay.
Anyway, I want to wish you all the best today, and I hope everyone's had a good day, learned heaps. Ngā mihi nui, kia koutou.